April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Abbeville, France. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff spots them through the glare, 8 massive shapes dropping through the contrails like anvils from heaven. His radio crackles with laughter. Zu fett zum kämpfen. Too fat to fight. The new American P-47s look like flying bathtubs, 7 tons each, slow, clumsy, easy kills. Steinhoff shoves his throttle forward. His nimble Bf 109 screams ahead. This will be over in seconds. What he doesn't know, in 60 seconds, one of those bathtubs will dive past him at 550 miles per hour, faster than his fighter can physically survive. And everything the Luftwaffe believes about air combat is about to shatter. For 3 years, the Luftwaffe had owned the European sky. Their Messerschmitt Bf 109 was a scalpel, light, agile, lethal. In the hands of aces like Steinhoff, who'd already downed over 40 Allied aircraft, it was an extension of will itself. Roll rate, instantaneous, climb rate, exceptional, turn radius, tight enough to loop inside a bomber formation and shred it from within. The 109 had humiliated the RAF's Hurricanes, outmaneuvered Spitfires in the right hands, and sent countless American bombers spiraling into French fields trailing black smoke. Then came the P-47. When Republic Aviation rolled the first Thunderbolt off the production line in 1942, even American pilots stared in disbelief. It weighed 12,700 pounds empty. Fully loaded for combat, fuel, ammunition, pilot, armor plating, it tipped the scales at nearly 17,000 pounds. To put that in perspective, that's 3 tons heavier than a Bf 109. It was wider than a Sherman tank. The cockpit sat so high off the ground that pilots needed a stepladder just to climb in. German intelligence officers studied the grainy reconnaissance photos in Xiao Ed. This wasn't a fighter. This was a flying billboard advertising American industrial stupidity. But there was something those intelligence reports missed, something the propaganda leaflets didn't mention, something hidden beneath all that bulk that would turn the entire European air war on its head. The engine. Buried in the Thunderbolt's massive nose was the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine that produced 2,000 horsepower. To cool it, Republic's engineers had wrapped the cockpit in a turbocharger system that could push the P-47 to 43,000 feet, higher than any fighter in the sky. But power and altitude were just numbers on paper. What mattered was what happened when you pointed that nose down and pushed. What happened was physics. All that weight, every pound the Germans mocked, became potential energy. The massive engine kept spinning at full power in a dive. The aerodynamic profile, for all its bulk, was clean. And when gravity took hold, the P-47 didn't just dive. It fell like a meteor wrapped in aluminum and fury. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, one of the first American pilots to fly the P-47 in combat, described it like this: "You didn't accelerate in a dive, you exploded." But in April 1943, as Steinhoff and his staff climbed to intercept, none of this was proven. The P-47 had flown exactly 0 combat missions over Europe. Its reputation was speculation, its tactics were untested, and 57 Luftwaffe pilots were about to provide its final exam. Steinhoff levels off at 28,000 feet, positioning his flight above the American formation. This is textbook. Height equals energy, energy equals speed, speed equals life. He'll dive, fire a burst into the lead American's cockpit, then climb back to altitude before the lumbering Thunderbolts can react. He's done it 100 times. He rolls inverted, pulls, dives. The altimeter spins backward, 27,000 to 26,000. The American formation grows in his gun sight. He can see the lead pilot's head turning, searching, too late. Steinhoff's finger tightens on the trigger. The MG-151 cannons hammer. Tracers arc toward. The American doesn't turn. He doesn't climb. He pushes forward into the steepest dive Steinhoff has ever seen, and suddenly, impossibly, the P-47 isn't falling away. It's pulling ahead, accelerating. The distance opens, not gradually, but violently, like someone cut the wire holding the American back. Steinhoff's airspeed indicator reads 420 miles per hour. He's never been faster. His wings are starting to buffet, warning him he's approaching the 109 structural limit. But the Thunderbolt ahead is still accelerating, still pulling away. And then, just as suddenly, it's gone. Vanished into the haze below, leaving only a vapor trail and the sick realization forming in Steinhoff's gut. They weren't too fat to fight. They were built for something else entirely. Captain Don Blakesley wasn't smiling when he pulled out of that first dive at 14,000 feet. He was calculating. Blakesley had transferred from the RAF's Eagle Squadron, where he'd flown Spitfires, beautiful, graceful machines that danced through the sky like ballerinas with guns. The P-47 felt like the opposite of everything he'd learned. It didn't dance, it didn't pirouette. Trying to turn with a 109 was suicide. The German would loop inside you every time, roll onto your tail, and that would be that. But that dive, that glorious, physics-defying, Messerschmitt humiliating dive. Blakesley had hit 480 miles per hour with throttle left to spare. He'd glanced back just once and seen Steinhoff's 109 falling behind, its wings flexing, the German pilot pulling desperately out of the dive before his airframe tore itself apart. The Bf 109G had a never-exceed speed of 460 mph. Past that, the wings could fold, the tail could rip off. The aircraft became a coffin. The P-47 could hit 550. When Blakesley landed at RAF Debden that afternoon, he didn't taxi to his usual spot. He rolled right up to the operations tent, shut down the engine while still in the runway, and walked straight to the briefing room where Colonel Hub Zemk was studying mission reports. "Sir," Blakesley said, still wearing his Mae West life vest, "we've been flying this thing wrong." What followed was a complete tactical revolution. The traditional fighter-pilot doctrine, the one every ace from von Richthofen to Bong had followed, was simple. Dogfight. Get behind the enemy. Turn tighter. Shoot. But the P-47 couldn't do that. It turned like a freight train. In a sustained turning fight with a 109 or FW-1-90, the Thunderbolt pilot would die. So don't turn. Zemka and Blakesley developed what they called boom and zoom. The concept was brutally simple. Start high as the P-47's massive turbocharger could push you, 30,000 feet, 35,000, higher than the Germans wanted to climb, higher than their engines performed well. Then wait, patrol, watch. When you spotted Germans below, you didn't maneuver into position. You rolled, inverted, and dove, straight down, throttle to the firewall. Let gravity and that monster R-2800 engine turn you into a bullet. You'd scream through the German formation at 500+ miles per hour, too fast for them to track, too fast for them to evade. You'd fire a 2-second burst into whatever crossed your gun sight. And then, this was crucial, you didn't stay. You didn't circle back for another pass. You didn't try to dogfight. You kept the dive going, blowing past them, pulling out at lower altitude with so much speed that even if they followed, even if they tried to chase, they'd either lose you or rip their own wings off trying to keep up. Then you'd use all that speed to climb, fast, efficient, back up to altitude, and you'd do it again. The Germans called it Die Erscheinung, the apparition. One moment the sky was clear. The next, an American fighter was in the middle of your formation, guns hammering, before vanishing into the vertical like a ghost. By May 1943, the 56th Fighter Group was using boom and zoom almost exclusively. By June, every P-47 squadron in the 8th Air Force had adopted it, and the kill ratios started shifting. But tactics are only half the story. The other half was what happened when German pilots, raised on the religion of the turning dogfight, couldn't resist following the Americans down. Oberleutnant Franz Steigler had 17 confirmed kills when he made his fatal mistake over Bremen on June 13, 1943. He'd spotted a lone P-47 at 26,000 feet, lagging behind its formation, probably engine trouble, probably low on fuel. Easy prey. Stigler climbed above, rolled in, closed to 300 meters. His cannon rounds sparked off the American's tail. The Thunderbolt's nose pitched forward into a dive. Stigler followed. This was instinct. This was training. You stayed with your target. You closed the distance. You fired until you saw the canopy shatter or the wing fold or the fire bloom. You finished it. At 20,000 feet, Stigler's airspeed indicator read 380 mph. Fast but manageable. The American was still ahead but not pulling away. He had him. At 18,000 feet, 420 ms, the controls felt heavier, his ailerons sluggish. The American was opening the gap slightly, but Stigler compensated, pointing his nose steeper. He'd done steeper dives before. His 109 could handle it. At 15,000 feet, 405 mph. The wings started buffeting. The cockpit filled with a vibration that rattled his teeth. The control stick fought him, but the American was right there, maybe 400 meters ahead. One more burst, just one more. At 12,000 feet, 492 mph, the right wing folded first, not broke, folded like paper. The Messerschmitt didn't tumble, it disintegrated. The tail section snapped free, the engine tore from its mounts. Stigler's body, still strapped in what remained of the cockpit, fell separately from the pieces of his aircraft, spinning separately, hitting the German countryside in a field outside Oldenburg as farmers watched from their doorways. The American pulled out at 8,000 feet, climbed back to altitude, and rejoined his formation. He never knew Stigler had been behind him. He never fired a shot. The kill wasn't recorded. It didn't count toward anyone's tally. But the wreckage told the story that the Luftwaffe's high command didn't want to hear. The P-47 wasn't just surviving dive attacks, it was weaponizing them. German engineering reports from June 1943 show frantic notations. Bf 109s were experiencing structural failure in high-speed descent. Focke-Wulf 190s were shedding tail assemblies during combat dive recovery. Pilots were filing complaints about inability to maintain pursuit against American fighters in vertical maneuvers. The problem was fundamental. German fighters were designed for the Eastern Front, for low-altitude dogfights with Soviet Yaks and LAGGs, where maneuverability mattered more than speed. They were optimized for turning, not diving. Their wings were thin and light. Their structures were built for agility. The P-47 was designed by engineers who apparently hated elegance. Its wings were thick. Its structure was overbuilt. It had redundant systems, armored fuel tanks, a pilot protected by a bathtub of steel plating. It was built to absorb punishment and keep flying. But inadvertently, almost accidentally, those same features made it the fastest diving aircraft in the European theater. Republic's engineers had stress-tested the airframe to 12 Gs. In practice, P-47 pilots routinely pulled 8 Gs out of high-speed dives, maneuvers that would have turned a 109 into scrap metal. The thick wings didn't flutter, the fuselage didn't flex, the tail stayed attached, and those massive turbo superchargers that made the plane so heavy? They worked in reverse during dives, actually helping to regulate engine power and prevent overspeeding. The P-47 became more controllable as it accelerated, while German fighters became less so. By August 1943, Luftwaffe tactical bulletins were explicitly warning pilots, do not follow the American P-47 into steep dives, do not attempt to chase in vertical maneuvers, engage only in horizontal, combat or climbing attacks. But telling fighter pilots not to chase is like telling a dog not to chase rabbits. It was instinct, it was training, and it was killing them. They started calling it the Jug, short for Juggernaut, because once the P-47 groups figured out their aircraft's true nature, they didn't just fight, they dominated. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson became a legend in a Thunderbolt. On June 26, 1943, his P-47 was hit by cannon fire from an WWII, rounds that shredded his tail, destroyed his radio, shattered his canopy, and wounded him in the shoulder. The Focke-Wulf pilot, thinking Johnson was finished, pulled alongside to confirm the kill. Johnson couldn't bail out. His canopy was jammed. He couldn't fight. Half his guns were gone, his hydraulics dead. So he did the only thing the P-47 did better than any aircraft in the sky. He dove. The FW-190 followed for maybe 3 seconds before its pilot recognized the futility and broke off. Johnson pulled out at 4,000 feet doing 510 miles per hour, flew 300 miles back across the English Channel with a dying engine and non-functional controls, and belly landed at his home base. The ground crew counted 21 cannon holes in the fuselage. Johnson walked away. The P-47 was repaired and flying again within a week. That became the Jug's reputation. It didn't just dive fast, it absorbed punishment that would have vaporized a 109. It brought pilots home who should have been dead, and when flown by someone who understood its strengths, it was unstoppable. Captain Robert Mack McCampbell of the 4th Fighter Group took it further. He started hunting German formations at 38,000 feet, so high that Luftwaffe pilots couldn't breathe properly. Their engines couldn't produce full power. Their hands went numb inside their gloves. Then, McCampbell would dive through entire staffels, 12, 16, 20 aircraft, firing into the densest part of the formation, not targeting any single plane, but creating chaos. German pilots would scatter. Some would instinctively dive away, and McCampbell would follow just those, the ones diving, because he knew what would happen. They'd either pull out early and he'd catch them in the flattening maneuver, or they'd stay in too long and the airframe would decide the fight for him. In 7 months of combat, McCampbell claimed 9 kills. 4 of them were Bf-109s that never saw a bullet from his guns. They chased him, dove with him, and simply came apart. The Luftwaffe started calling the P-47 der Höllenhammer, Hell's Hammer. By early 1944, the numbers were undeniable. The P-47 had a kill ratio of 4.6 to 1. For every Thunderbolt lost, 4.6 German aircraft went down. In dive-initiated combat, that ratio jumped to over 7 to 1. 8th Air Force bomber losses dropped by 40% once P-47 escort became standard. The skies over Europe, which had belonged to Germany since 1939, were changing hands. Johannes Steinhoff survived the war. He'd eventually command Jagdgeschwader 7, flying the revolutionary Me-262 jet. But in his post-war memoir, he devoted an entire chapter to April 8, 1943, the day he first encountered the P-47. He wrote, "We mocked it, God forgive us, we laughed. We thought the Americans had sent us a gift, fat, slow targets that would pad our scores. I didn't understand until I watched one vanish below me at a speed I couldn't follow that we weren't fighting an inferior aircraft. We were fighting a different philosophy of air combat entirely. And our philosophy, built on elegance and agility, was obsolete." On April 11, 1945, 3 weeks before Germany's surrender, a formation of P-47Ns escorted B-17s over Berlin. The Luftwaffe barely responded. Those few Bf-109s that did climb to intercept stayed high, stayed distant, and broke away the moment an American turned toward them. No one dove, no one chased. The fear had calcified into doctrine. The last aerial combat victory by a Luftwaffe fighter over a P-47 occurred on March 2, 1945. The last confirmed P-47 kill of a German aircraft was April 25, 8 days before the war ended. In total, P-47 Thunderbolts flew 546,000 combat sorties, more than any other American fighter. They destroyed 787 enemy aircraft, 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 trucks, and 6,000 armored vehicles. They dropped 132,000 tons of bombs. They fired 135 million rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, and they did it while being too fat to fight. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on Republic Aviation's engineers. In 1946, company founder Alexander Kartveli was asked if he'd known during the design phase that the P-47's weight would become its greatest tactical advantage. He smiled. "We designed it to survive, to protect the pilot, to carry enough fuel to reach Berlin and come home. The diving speed, that was an unexpected benefit. Sometimes you build something so tough, so powerful, that it just refuses to obey the rules everyone else follows." There's a P-47D on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Its fuselage is painted in the markings of the 56th Fighter Group. Its tail bears 28 kill markers. Children press their faces against the ropes, staring up at the massive radial engine, the .850 caliber machine guns jutting from its wings. And sometimes, if you're there on a quiet day when the museum is nearly empty, you can almost hear it. The sound of 2,000 horsepower screaming through thin air at 550 miles per hour. The sound of a bathtub that learned to fly by refusing to turn, refusing to dance, refusing to follow the rules. The sound of something too heavy, too brutal, too American to fail. The Luftwaffe was right about one thing. It did look like a bathtub. They just didn't realize until too late that bathtubs, when dropped from high enough, hit harder than anything else in the sky.